The VLGA is offering a special councillor professional development intensive series. Partner with 3 other councils and save more than 50% off the minimum cost of completing all 13 modules in Year 1. The intensives will be held over 3 days. They're cost-effective, time-efficient and promote the benefits of peer-to-peer and face-to-face learning. In addition to the intensives and in recognition that every council has different needs, the VLGA also offers bespoke training options, both online and in person. A faculty of facilitators will work with you to customise a program that responds directly to the unique professional development needs of your council. To find out more, head to www.vlga.org.au. Hello, welcome to the Well-Travelled Executive Series, where we delve into the journeys of leaders who are shaping the future. This series is part of the Local Government News Roundup podcast series, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. And today we're thrilled to have Rebecca McKenzie, a trailblazer in local government, joining us. With a career spanning continents and a passion for diversity and leadership, Rebecca shares her unique insights and experiences. Get ready for an engaging conversation that explores the evolving landscape of local governance and the power of authentic leadership. All part of the Well-Travelled Executive Series from the Local Government News Roundup. I'm really thrilled to have Rebecca McKenzie on the podcast today. Rebecca and I have been colleagues for some time, and Rebecca is moving on from local government CEO land pretty much as we speak. And I think it's a great opportunity to catch up, Rebecca, and find out a bit more about your career journey. How do we find you today?
Hi, Chris. It's lovely to be with you. I'm great. Thank you. Really good.
Any second thoughts about your decision to leave the world of local government CEO at least behind?
Well, no second thoughts. I think the decision to leave Glen Eira, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the decision to leave Glen Eira is a well-considered one, and I think the timing is right. Of course, when you've put your heart and soul into a place, you'll always have those thoughts about, well, what if I stayed? It would be easy to stay, but actually I think organisations do need to refresh themselves, and it's a perfect time for that. And I need to refresh myself as well. So it will be a very sad day when I leave Glen Eira, but I'm looking forward to whatever the future might hold too.
Well, as this goes out, that day is fast approaching. And I do want to talk about your career path and the journey that's brought you to this point. But I did want to remind you that I interviewed you for a different program a couple of years ago, I think it was now. And I asked you straight out, if CEOs in local government have a use-by date? And at the time, I think you said, I think so, but you weren't sure when yours was. So were you thinking about that at that time?
Absolutely. I remembered that as well, Chris, when I was thinking about today's conversation that we were going to have. And it was pretty much 2 years ago, actually. Right. At that point in time, I still had quite a view about when my time would come, and had already commenced some conversations with the elected council at that time around, what would be the right time for me to step back and what that meant in terms of contract expiry dates and elections and all of those sorts of things. So yes, there was a reason for that wry smile and that we had at the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements to think about in making these decisions, isn't there?
And it's not just about you, because that's the other thing to remember. Well, for me, it wasn't just about me. It was actually also about thinking about the right time for the organisation and for the elected council.
Yeah, of course. I've been doing a bit of reading about you in preparation for this, and I'm not sure that I did know that you had worked outside of Australia in public roles in the UK and in Ireland. So take us back to the start of your local government journey. When did that begin?
So my first local government role was for Swindon Borough Council in the UK, and I was there for 5 years. And at the time, I'd been working in Dublin in Ireland for a university, and and it became time to sort of move on and find the next opportunity. Because I have British patriality, it made it quite easy for me, and my husband now, is a British citizen. So going to the UK was an easy thing for us to do. And I can remember the job advertisement for the council at Swindon Borough Council, and they basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, but, we're really crap, but we know we can be better, and we want somebody to come on board and help us do that. And the role was their sort of Director of Human Resource Management, because HR is my profession. So I went to Swindon, and they took a chance on appointing, an Aussie who had a few years working in Ireland, but really no experience in the UK sector. And that was my first foray into local government. Of course, councils are very different over there, but it certainly was the start of what has been quite a rich and rewarding career.
Did you think at the time that was the path that you were then going to continue down, that local government was it?
No, definitely not. And, if you've been doing your reading on me, Chris, you'll see that, my career history has been largely that I've got roles, stayed in them for sort of that 3 to 5 year period of time and then moved on. My early career was in state government in Queensland. But I think there is something about local government, and certainly there has been something about Glen Eira, signs of the times and things like that. COVID really changed things, but that had sort of sucked me in and made me really quite passionate about the sector and about the work that we do and connecting with our communities.
Do you think your HR background has influenced the way you've approached your career as you've taken on those leadership roles?
I think it's interesting because HR is not a regular qualification that you see in CEO roles, particularly in local government. Traditionally the local government CEO has been the accountant or the chief engineer or sometimes the planner and a little bit more now sometimes also, the social worker. HR gives you a really good grounding in terms of leadership, managing people, managing relationships. And I think that that's one of the key factors for success for any CEO. And certainly when I got my first CEO role in local government here in Victoria at Mitchellshire, it was my HR background that was one of the things that attracted the council to me, because they felt that there was some relationship issues that were broken between councillors and between councillors and the organisation. And they felt that some of my skills would help to repair that and set them on a new path. And it appeared that it did.
I remember when you got that role, and I'd been appointed as the CEO at Hobson's Bay, and we did compare notes that our backgrounds were a bit unusual for council CEOs. Yours was HR and some corporate, mine was governance and comms and IT, etc. But there's a little bit more of that happens now across the sector, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And that's one of the wonderful things about sort of the change, I think, that has happened over the last 10 years or so, is that broadening of what the sort of view, perspective, the definition of what successful leadership looks like, and an increasing focus on how we can foster embracing diversity within local government, because our communities are diverse. Why shouldn't our governance processes be diverse and the people who lead our organisations be diverse?
Yeah. So you got that first role in the UK. I think you worked in Ireland as well.
Yeah, so I was in Ireland working for the University College of Dublin as a HR manager before that, but then I was in Dublin for 3 years and then in Swindon in the UK for 5 years. Yeah. And at the end of that period was kind of time to make a decision to either move on to a new role or come back to Australia. And when you're in senior roles, you need to make a commitment for a 3 to 5 year period of time, really, from an ethical perspective, I think. And so the decision was made. At the time, my sister had been diagnosed with breast cancer. My grandmother was going into a nursing home. So, there was a few things that attracted me back to Australia. So we went on a bit of a journey around South America for 6 months and then arrived back in Australia about a month after Black Saturday.
Oh, really? Okay. And how long after your arrival back in the country did you get back into local government?
Well, it was interesting because, Chris, if apparently my husband and I had done a deal with each other that we wouldn't apply for any jobs until we got back into the country. But I couldn't resist. I need to have a plan in place. And so we were in Rio on the day of Carnival, and I saw a job advertised at Yarra Ranges Council, and I thought, I'll just throw my application in. And I had my first interview from Mexico, my second interview from Guatemala, my third interview the day after and that was in the days before video conferencing. It was just over the phone. And then my third interview the day after I flew back into Australia, and I started a week later. So, and a shout out to Glen for taking a chance on an expat like me too.
Well, and the rest, as they say, is history. I'm interested in your observations coming from the UK and Ireland back to Australia, the state of the sectors, the comparisons, the maturity. What struck you when you came back to council land in Australia about those experiences?
Yeah, well, councils in Australia are quite different to councils in the UK for a start. So it was a little bit like comparing apples and oranges, because in the UK, we had, I think it was 59 councillors or something like that, a cabinet and a backbench, and it operated very, very differently to how councils in Australia operate. And I must admit that probably for the first 6 months of landing here, there were aspects of the kind of the professional environment that I had in the UK that I missed, and the complexity of the organisations over there, their size, their scale, all of that. But, after a little bit of settling time, I really grew to love the local government sector here in Australia. And Australia has always been a bit of a fast follower of trends in local governance in the UK. Our system is built on many of the same principles. And when I was in the UK, it was really a period of time when councils were going through a lot of independent scrutiny and looking how they might demonstrate their worth and value to the community, consideration of broader sector restructuring and how you worked in strategic partnerships, the whole concept of place. All of those were early concepts when I was in the UK, and we hadn't quite got there with some of that in Australia yet. But I think it's interesting to see how the Australian sector has, over time since, started to focus on many of the same things and gone down a similar path.
I've always felt that what's happening in the UK and local government has always been a bit of a precursor to what could and ultimately will happen in Australia. Best value is an example of that. Do you think that's continuing and likely to continue? Because the state of the sector in the UK is pretty parlous at the moment, which suggests all sorts of concerns for us potentially.
It is. It's very dire at the moment, and a lot of that is around financial sustainability. But also, they're experiencing many of similar issues that we're experiencing here in terms of matters relating to conduct, to intervention, and quite significant and serious governance issues. And I've stayed in touch with what's happening in the sector over there. Many of my ex-colleagues I'm still in touch with and have been involved in the sector over an extended period of time, and the stories that they tell are not wildly dissimilar to the stories that we hear through the sector here.
Yeah. They might even end up with a model similar to ours, where you have 10 or 12 councillors rather than 70, the way the restructure discussion's going at the moment over there.
Well, you never know. And, of course, they work a two-tier system of government over there, but then even within the local government sector, there's 3 different sort of categories of council, from district to unitary and county councils. And when you think about the opportunity that exists even here in Victoria in our local government sector for, what's the next iteration of local governance here, there's really got to be some thought starting to put into, well, what are the long-term solutions for the sector? We've had the current model that we've got for quite a long period of time. It's served us reasonably well, but there's a few inextricable challenges that we have that some of the old solutions just aren't necessarily going to fix.
Yeah. Rebecca, you've been described as one of the leaders in the sector, not just a thought leader, but a values-based leader, noted for investing in people. Do you think that's accurate? Does that sit well with you?
I like it. Yeah, that would align with my values, I have to say, Chris. And certainly I just try to be authentic, and I turn up every day trying to do the best job that I can for my organisation and for my community. But one of the things that I'm most proud of the work that we've done here at Glen Eira is about our organisational culture, the culture both for the staff. We have top decile staff engagement scores and all of those sorts of things, but also the culture that we've created between the organisation and our elected councillor group and our community. And I think being authentic and knowing what to sweat and what not to sweat and being respectful of roles, they're all a really important part of that.
Has that changed for you over time, your approach to leadership?
I think it's matured over time as I've got older, but also relaxed much more into role and learnt what, really got comfortable with the role of CEO and what you can control and what you can't control and where you can provide best support to your elected councillors and the best role that you can play in helping the organisation to understand what its opportunities are, and also how you deal with risk, how you deal with crisis, how you show up every day. Yeah, I think that has changed over time. And I think one of the things that helped me with that is probably the time that I spent out of the sector when I was traveling around South America for 6 months. I didn't have a job, I had no mortgage, I had no responsibilities. That type of time out does help you to reset your head about really what's important. And so therefore I've never really then been worried about losing my job or any of those things. And I think that that's helped me to be a bit more balanced and measured in terms of my role as a leader.
How do you, speaking of balance, how do you balance a role like CEO with your other commitments? You're also the chair of Zoos Victoria. Is that a role you're going to maintain?
Yes. My appointment for Zoos Victoria continues through until I think it's September of 2027. So I will. And, that's a role that I really enjoy. And I think it's nice to have something in addition to the role of CEO of local government can be all consuming, and it can really take over every aspect of your life. So I think it's nice to have something else professionally to continue to sort of motivate you and encourage you to grow. And in many ways, there's a lot of elements of zoos leadership that is quite similar to running a big organisation like a council, but I enjoy that. But, part of how you balance things is about having great people around you. And, both Glen Eira and at Zoos Victoria, we've got great executive team and, really strong culture that's focused on can do. So, but yeah, you'll find the time. You find the time for everything. There's 24 hours in a day. You only need so many of them to sleep.
True, fair enough. Being the chair of a board like that, as opposed to being the CEO, the operational leader of a council, does that give you a different perspective on leadership? Because it's nearly like the mayor as opposed to the CEO, isn't it, when you're chairing a board?
It absolutely is. And that's actually what I like. That's what I like about it, because I'm able to take some of those sort of reflections in terms of how I like to work with the mayor and how I like that relationship to be, to applying that in practice then at Zoos Victoria and being really sort of respectful of role. And I think that that's the key thing that underpins all elements of good governance really, is understanding your role and knowing how to stay within those swim lanes.
You've been particularly vocal in the sector about gender balance over the years, and I know it was a particular imperative for you when you were the president of LG Pro for some time. Have we made progress from your scorecard? Yeah.
Yes, I think we have. And you only need to look at the numbers to see that we've made progress. I haven't counted recently, but I think we were up to sort of 32 or 33 female CEOs. There's so much turnover at the moment. I can't keep keep count of it.
Yeah, based on the numbers as we record, just this year there've been 10 appointments, as in changeover appointments. I think 60% of those have been women. So the balance might be shifting even more so as we speak.
Yes. And when I first became a CEO, what's that, sort of 13 and a half years or so ago, I think there was 12 female CEOs out of 79. I used to joke in presentations that there was more CEOs called, Peter, Steve and John than there was female CEOs. And we've seen a lot of work there. And that's been as a result of, I think a number of things. One has been around some of the systemic change, some of the legislative change, but also elements of cultural change and broader understanding of how leadership doesn't need to fit one particular mould, and recognising that, councils actually often need different things to help them succeed and thrive. And often that comes in a different package than might have been the traditional model.
And of course, it's important to see that reflected within council organisations. I know you, I think, entered an all-male executive team when you went to Glen. That's not the case anymore.
I did. And that was one of the things that Andrew Newton, my predecessor, said to me. He said, you've got an all-male executive, you might want to do something about that. Yeah. So that was sage advice. But yeah, we have a diverse leadership team, and we have a diverse elected councillor group as well, which is great.
What advice have you got for women who aspire to leadership positions in local government?
Oh, look, I think there's a lot said, Chris, about imposter syndrome and that. And I think it is true. Quite often women will be more hesitant to put themselves forward. But I think there are so many opportunities these days. Leadership can take different shapes and forms. And my recommendation is take a chance, put yourself out there, invest in building relationships, invest in knowing and understanding what the things are that you might be able to do after getting the role to help fill some of the gaps that you might have. For example, I hadn't had a lot of exposure to advocacy when I first became a CEO, just because of the nature of the portfolio that I'd held and all of those sorts of things and the amount of time that I'd had in the sector. So the first thing that I did when I became a CEO was to find myself an advocacy mentor. The sector is wonderful in terms of having really strong, collegiate, not competitive relationships. Well, that's what I've found, certainly. And there's plenty of people out there who are more than willing to lend a hand, give you some advice, be a kind ear. And I think often people won't put themselves forward for roles because they're a bit worried about what others might think or that they might not quite be ready. But who's ever 100% ready for anything, really? We learn on the job. That's a good thing. That's a sign of a good leader, is learning on the job. And it makes you humble.
I recall a mentor telling me many years ago, try to have as many strings to your bow as possible in local government. For me, it was finance, and did a bit of work to try and build up some skills and credibility in that space. And it occurs to me even to this day that people don't, I think, give local government leaders, CEOs, enough credit for the breadth of the issues that they manage. There's not many other sectors where the CEO position is responsible for so many different functional areas. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. And I was actually thinking this morning, there's not many jobs where one day you could be, in the same day, you might be in a meeting with a minister, you might be, in my case, attending a 100th birthday party at a nursing home for, one of the residents, you might be meeting with the unions on issues, and you might be out supporting the team at the depot for something. The breadth of the role is actually one of the things that I find most exciting about it, and probably one of the reasons why I've stayed in the sector and in this job for so long, because every day is different. It's kind of like it is not Groundhog Day, that's for sure.
What is something about the role that you won't miss, that you perhaps haven't really enjoyed?
There's not much, although, last night when I was walking out of here at 11:15, I was kind of thinking, 3 more Tuesday nights. I'm not going to miss that. So
that's fair. That's a fair observation.
Yeah, but, it's been a good kind of like 15, 20 years since I've had every night back to myself in the week. So that'll take a while to get used to. But Chris, I have to say there's not much that I'll miss.
I've heard you say this before. You reckon it's the best job in the world, but there must be things that have challenged you along the way. I want to tease out some highlights and some lowlights, but let's start with lowlights. What do you think back on and think perhaps I could have handled that better, or that was something I've got to chalk up to experience and maybe learn from it next time? What comes to mind there?
I think most CEOs will say to you, Chris, that the difficult part of our job is the people stuff. And okay, maybe because of my background, I might bring a slightly different perspective to it than others, but that doesn't mean that some of the staffing decisions, the decisions to have people exit the organisation, all of that sort of stuff haven't been difficult. And certainly in my career, I've had times where there's been overt campaigns against me bullying, harassment, all of those sorts of things over an extended period of time. And that's been a really difficult thing to navigate. But I've always had the view that I'm not going to let the bastards get me down. Also, ultimately, at the end of the day, the person or people who will be the judges of my contribution will be the elected councillor group as a group, and also, the organisation as a whole. And as long as, for me, the indicators have been strong around staff engagement, staff feedback, councillors being happy, organisational performance continuing to improve, all of those sorts of things, then actually I've had to kind of put my coat of protection on to sort of protect myself from some of that stuff. So, and that's the nasty stuff, and that, when you're in a high profile role, you can't really totally get away from that, and you just have to find a way to build your inner resilience to get through that. So those times have been hard. COVID, of course, was rough.
Yeah.
Not for the first little period of time, I like to reflect, because actually, who doesn't love a challenge, and it was exciting and it was different, and we were kind of having to make things up as we went. And, that was a really dynamic time, early COVID, but we kind of took it on as a sprint, and it ended up being a marathon. And in the last, little period of time, it became much more challenging in terms of, keeping perspective and keeping buoyant around things. And then, of course, there's various moments along the way, but most of those you don't really remember, because it's a bit like getting your wisdom teeth out, isn't it? It's painful at the time, but this too will pass.
But it fades. And I recall you talking about the opportunity that came from COVID for digital transformation. It was a nice to have prior to then, wasn't it? And councils were at different levels of adopting that digital space, but then it became absolutely imperative, didn't it?
Absolutely. And it was kind of like you had to fast forward over a very short period of time, and those councils that had kind of invested in portable technology and things like that actually were able to transition to sort of working from home models and all of those sorts of things a lot more quickly. But I think the other thing was not necessarily just about the hard architecture and those sorts of things. It was actually about, well, what was your culture like before COVID? Because if you had a strong culture before COVID, then that was also able to carry you through in terms of, levels of trust within the organisation, trust with your community. And there was some really tough decisions that we had to make during that period of time in terms of, who was going to still have a job, who was going to be stood down, what services that you might be able to offer, what you had to sort of say no to, all those sorts of things. So it was interesting times.
You mentioned the high-profile nature of the role of a council CEO, and in some areas, particularly outside of the metropolitan areas, it's even more stark. These roles stand out in those communities. I hear a lot of second levels say, I don't really want to step up for not that much more reward to put myself in that position. And then with the political element that CEOs have to deal with. How do you respond to that? And is it a risk to the development of future leaders in our sector?
Yes, but that's kind of what comes with the gig. So I think, being a local government CEO is not going to be for everybody. There are personal sacrifices that you make, but on the flip side, it is a deeply rewarding role. But you've got to be ready for it. In your head, got to be ready for it. And there are different ways that you can learn to navigate some of those issues around how you set boundaries and those sorts of things. I can remember when I was at Mitchell even, and Mitchell's not a small rural, but even at Mitchell, quite often the community's line between the CEO and the councillors was a little bit blurred, and sometimes you played more of a ceremonial role perhaps than you might normally play in a municipality like Glen Eira, for example. But you can set boundaries, but I think what's important is how you have that conversation with your elected councillor group as well, so that you're all on the same page in terms of what those boundaries might look like, what the expectations are, what's reasonable, etc. Because in rural and regional Victoria, people do still expect their CEO to be a part of the community, even if you're not living there.
Yeah. And of course, your replacement incoming at Glen Eira is a former rural council CEO in Lucy Roffey. What's the key piece of advice that you have, I imagine, already given to Lucy as she steps into the role?
I'm not sure I need to give that much advice to Lucy. She's an experienced CEO, and while she hasn't had a lot of experience in a metro council, I think really, those skills and experience that she has from her time at Central Goldfields will bode her well here at Glen Eira. But I think that every council is different. There's 79 councils in Victoria. Every single one of them is different. The culture within the council is different. The dynamic between the councillors and the officers, their community has different issues and those sorts of things. But I think, the one thing that I'd say to Lucy is, enjoy it. You're not inheriting something that's broken. So you can actually take your time to really work out what the biggest impact that you want to make here. But, Glen Eira is a really great organisation where you can take good managed risks because there is that level of...
It's a prize gig. There's a few councils looking for CEOs at the moment, but the current state of affairs is nowhere near as healthy as it is at Glen Eira. What would you say to the people out there thinking of taking on roles at challenged councils, as some might be doing at the moment?
I think a role in a challenged council can also be good. Don't take this as an indication that I'm going to be applying for the gig, but, I think whoever goes into Hobson's Bay, for example, that's going to be a good gig for somebody because it is a rebuild, but it just depends on what you want for your career. When I went into Mitchell, I was the 7th CEO in a 5-year period of time. Now, that included long-term temps. So a lot of people might have sort of said, actually, I'm not going to touch that one with a barge pole. But I applied for it. I got the job. Maybe I wouldn't have got the job if there'd been a different level of competition for it. So maybe that was an opportunity for me. But every job is what you make of it. And so, there are many challenging gigs across the sector. I think it just depends on where you're at in your career, what you feel like you're able to invest. I think if you take on a challenging council, you've got to know and understand that and be prepared to kind of throw yourself into that, knowing and understanding that there will be great times and there will be tougher times, but work to surround yourself with people that you can trust and who will help sort of share your vision for what you want that place to be. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we all want to leave where we go in a better place than it was when we inherited it. And organisations go through ebbs and flows, and we're also only ever as good as the next election, aren't we?
Yeah,
so,
true.
That can change things.
So what do you do outside of work to keep perspective, to maintain balance, and how's that going to change in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, so apart from my zoos gig, I love walking, long distance walking. I have a rescue Staffordshire who is my fur child, or David's my fur child, and so I like spending time out in the great outdoors. So certainly I anticipate doing more travel and those sorts of things when I finish up at Glen Eira. But, I'll also have a bit more of a portfolio career, I think, Chris. It's time to be a little flexible for a while, but, yeah.
Where would you like to travel to?
Well, I've already booked, so I'm going on a nice long walk in Portugal for September. I'm going to be hiking the Camino Portuguese from Coimbra to Santiago. So it's about 350 Ks over 3 weeks. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Have you done anything of that scope and duration before?
Yeah, I've done a lot of long distance hiking. I did 3 weeks in Nepal a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago. But over the years, I've had the good fortune of doing lots of long distance hiking. I've been to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro and done hiking down in Patagonia and lots of different hikes through various parts of Europe, etc. I think my happy place is on the side of a mountain somewhere with pair of boots on.
With I assume, no mobile phone or internet connection.
No, although, that's something that I'm going to have to get used to because I probably am slightly addicted to my phone and just making sure that everything is okay.
Very good. All right, I'm just picturing you on the sides of mountains a lot more in the near future. So you talked about a portfolio career. Is there a dream job still that you would like the opportunity to take up?
Not a specific dream job in my head, Chris, but I think, I still feel a great sense of deep passion for the sector. And so therefore I do hope to stay connected to the sector in some way. Perhaps I'll come back as a monitor or an administrator somewhere that, you've been yourself in the past. But I also like to think that there's a role to play in intervening before councils get to that point. And failing councils is a bit of a growth industry in our sector. And I'd really like to see how we might be able to sort of pull that around and help councils to take ownership before the state government needs to intervene to say, things aren't feeling quite right here. Maybe, we need somebody to come in and do some work with us and to help us just get things back on track while we can control it, while we're in charge of it, while we're calling the shots. And I think that that's a real opportunity.
Is that governance issue the biggest issue, the emerging trend or challenge that the sector's facing at the moment?
Well, that together with the long-term financial sustainability. I can't see the financial situation turning around quickly. You've just had the government's response come out to the inquiry around local government financial sustainability. I think to be best was lukewarm in terms of providing any shining light on the horizon that will be a quick fix to the sector's financial challenges. And I can't, both federal and state government are also financially constrained. So the expectation that there will be a big bucket of money coming over the horizon, a larger slice of the pie in terms of the GST or, new untied grant funding streams, it's reasonably unlikely and unlikely to be at a transformational level. So what does that mean for the sector? Going to have to change something.
Yeah. So if you could make one particular change or innovation to how local government functions, what would it be?
I think that whole relationship between the state and local government needs to be transformed. From time to time, it's felt like it hasn't always been a highly respectful relationship. I think there's great opportunity now with the new Minister for Local Government having a background in local government and perhaps bringing a slightly different perspective. But I think there's an opportunity for that to be transformed.
A former councillor from your own council, is he not?
Yes, yes, that's true. Yeah, and the member for Bentley, so state member overseeing Glen in Glen Eira. But, and I think really that opportunity, so how do we really think about what does sort of collaboration across the sector look like? How do we share in different ways? How do we reduce some of the cost of servicing our communities? I've always thought that there's an opportunity to sort of separate bureaucracy and democracy. Democracy should be local, should be connected to the community, those sorts of things. Does it really matter where you get your payroll service from? Not sure. There's some of the questions for the sector, I think, moving into the future.
And do you see yourself playing a role in those discussions in some way, or would you like to?
I'd like to. I've always got an opinion. Chris, you know me. I think it will be interesting to see how some of that stuff plays out over the next little period of time. I know that the MAV is starting to have conversations with CEOs from across the sector to sort of think about, what does the future of local government look like? Different peak bodies have sort of started to think about that over a period of time. I'm not sure what the state government might be thinking. If this government gets another term, they might feel bolder around long-term sector reform. It's hard to tell. I don't have a crystal ball, but would I personally like to play a role in just helping the sector to be better, whatever that looks like? Of course.
As you move into this next phase of your career, looking back, if you could say something to your younger self, what would that be?
What would I say to my younger self? Don't be so cocky and learn that humility early, but stay true to your values, because that will serve you. It will serve you well. And it has, I have to say, Chris, that has served me well. There are very few regrets that I have in my life, next to no regrets that I have in my career, I have to say.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate in that regard. And, I've had great colleagues, great mentors, great bosses, great people to support me along the way, and wonderful team. And the local government sector is a great place. I'd highly recommend it to anybody. And I will miss it too much to leave it.
So you feel you were a bit cocky early on? I'm not going to let that go without...
In my very early days, yes. I don't know. Some people might say I still am, but, you need to have a little bit of confidence to actually have the personal resilience to make it in this world as well, I think.
I think that's a nice note to end on. Thank you, Rebecca, for being so generous with your time. Congratulations on all you've achieved, not just at Glen Eira, but for the sector more broadly. Over the last probably decade and a half, really, you've been out there at the forefront in the Victorian sector. And I wish you well for whatever comes next, and I look forward to hearing about your future adventures.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Rebecca McKenzie with us today on the Well-Travelled Executive Series. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Well-Travelled Executive Series from the Local Government News Roundup, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. I hope you found Rebecca McKenzie's insights as inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, and check out the other episodes in the series for more conversations with leaders who are making a difference. The Local Government News Roundup is recorded in the city of Greater Geelong, Victoria, on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Until next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now. Local government teams shouldn't have to waste time on manual data entry into outdated systems. With Symphony 3 Smart Glue, you don't have to. You can automate repetitive tasks, eliminate double handling, and connect legacy systems with ease. Smart Glue helps councils streamline operations, reduce errors, and deliver better services without replacing your existing systems. It's time to build smarter, more connected local governments. Learn more at www.symphony3.com. Symphony 3, supporters of the Local Government News Roundup.